Hello, and thank you for joining us online as we are going through the relationship series, Relationship Goals. And this is the part two kind of conversation. And I just want to give you a quick kind of summary of what we went through in part one. It was called Know Thyself. It's a relationship between you and you. We find that is a very important place to start because a lot of us, we have not done the journey of knowing ourselves, knowing our pains, knowing our triggers, knowing the things about us that will either draw us closer to God, to one another, or draw us away from God and one another. And so we need to know those things, and it's not an easy place to go. The message was just, I spoke about my own personal journey of knowing myself that started at the age of 29, and at the end of, not even the end, I would say at the beginning of that journey, as I was going through unforgiveness, going through past images, hurts, pains, feelings, and really pressing into them. As I explore them and heal through that, Candace would say to me, like, you are becoming a completely different person. And I found that just it was so profound. It was not just this little thing I was adding to my life. It was like opening up this idea of my true self, being who God has made me to be in His world. And until those moments, until we really know ourselves, we are easily just flip-flopping through the waves of emotions, and we are kind of just going with what culture is telling us. We're not aligning with God's view of the world, God's view of humanity. And so as we know ourselves and develop a relationship with ourselves and all the different parts of who we are, I believe, and I have seen in myself that it opens up just this new understanding, a new way of healing and being healers. I talked through a lot of the verses, spoke about what Jesus said about knowing ourselves through the idea of hypocrite, and then went through just John the Baptist and how important he was in knowing himself, that he knew God, knew himself, and knew what the world was going through, and knew his limits. So, and if you missed it, please catch up. It's a good episode to catch up on. Make sure you go through episode 1 when Hannah spoke, and then episode 2, and this is just a conversation. Today we're going to go through more information from Pete Scazzero, one of our favorites, and he wrote a book called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. Just a shout out there if you have not read through that or have read any of those emotionally healthy books. It's a good place to start because it's a place of how can you be spiritually mature, emotionally immature and spiritually mature. Like, there is no way that those two things link up. You are a holistic person, I am a holistic person, and we can't just arrive out of nowhere. There's a process, there's a journey, there's a maturation, and we have to get emotionally mature. Hannah, do you want to start just by reading off the list of the idea of the false self? So today we're going to talk about false self and true self.
Yeah. So straight from Pete Scazzero, the false self is pretending consciously or unconsciously to be somebody you are not. Defensive and superficial, it severely limits our relationships and our effective witness for Christ. So the following is just a list he's compiled of statements that might ring true to you if you're living out of that false self rather than your true self. So number 1 is, I sometimes say yes when I really prefer to say no. Number 2, I often need to be approved by others to feel good about myself. Number 3, I often remain silent in order to avoid conflict. Number 4, when I make mistakes, I feel like a failure. Number 5, at times I compromise my own values and principles to avoid looking weak or foolish. Number 6, my self-image soars with compliments and is crushed by criticism. Number 7, I do for others at times what they can and should do for themselves. Number 8, I'm fearful and reluctant to take risks. Number 9, I often go along with what others want rather than rock the boat. And number 10, I compare myself a lot to others. So this list from Pete Scazzero just kind of comes up with those incidences in life that are really common that could reveal to you that you are living more out of a false or a masked self than out of who you truly are. And when we do that, obviously, as John talked about in his sermon, we can't actually mature in our faith. Because if we don't know what we're really feeling, how we really want to react to things, then we actually, it takes going back into that to know how to mature from that point on.
Yeah. Out of those things, what was something that sticks out to you personally most?
Ooh.
I know. I was writing a list of things that.
I think the ones that have to do with criticism. So maybe number 6, though this is gonna sound sad. My self-image doesn't soar with compliments. I have a tendency to kind of dismiss compliments that I've been working on over the years of really taking compliments in, saying thank you, and instead of trying to dismiss the compliments. But the second part, being crushed by criticism, is very true. And if you're interested at all in the Enneagram personality test, I'm a number 1, and it's actually very common for number 1s to have a really difficult time with criticism, not because they don't want to grow, but because they are always their own worst critics. So that one is, I think, living out of a false self, because you're really, and this goes with number 2, I often need to be approved by others to feel good about myself.
Yeah.
You're really dependent in your emotions in your life on other people voicing their approval of you, or their approval of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's just, I was just thinking it because I can be that way when someone gives me a compliment, or I just downplay it because it feels weird. Like, I don't know about you, but maybe you get a compliment, it feels good, and you say thank you, and it's like you mean it. When you give me a compliment, I say thank you, and I don't mean it.
Well, you might mean like thank you to them, but more like to end the conversation.
Yeah, right? It's like more like thank you? ?
I don't believe you.
Yeah, I have a very hard time on taking compliments and criticism because I really don't like when the attention is on me. And I know that sounds crazy, but like if you notice me, like here, I'll call myself out. If you notice me after even a service that I speak, I try to find one person to talk to, so I don't need to talk to anyone else, because I'm withering. I don't know if it's fear, or I don't know if it's like I just gassed out. And I know of myself that I gain energy in honest one-on-one conversations, but I have a hard time with multiple conversations.
Yeah.
And so I will hide, I will grab a vacuum, I will try to speak to one person, I will acknowledge, I will thank you for compliments or questions, we can go back and forth, but in that moment, I know that there's this, and I haven't quite put my finger on it if it's just a personality, but in that moment,
maybe a combination.
Yeah, that I am done.
So I know you know about Kurt Thompson, and he actually says this about the whole compliment thing. And I don't practice this. I just heard this a few years ago at a little workshop he did. And he said that in those moments when you receive a compliment, because our brains, the way they're wired, take longer to really take that in and cement it, or it takes much longer than criticism, you need to stay in that moment for 30 seconds. You can't just say thank you and like turn away, try to escape as fast as possible. Or what I do is I usually just make a really awkward right turn in the conversation and change the subject, which isn't helpful either.
I do that too.
Yeah, or make a joke. Those things aren't what we're supposed to be doing. We have to stay in that moment, making eye contact with the person, really letting what they said sink in and accepting it as truth for those 30 seconds in order to even build up a memory of positive things that people have said. Because positive things people have said take longer to cement in our memory than negative things people have said. So that's a really cool practice. I have not been consistent in doing that, but I think if I was, probably maybe have a little less of a problem with that.
Yeah, and you would be more courageous moving forward in taking on those compliments. I love that thought, like building a memory, right? And like how we have built up a memory of like negative events in our lives because of how just the brain works, right? So when you receive a criticism, you will go, or you and I will go right into like this flight or fight or freeze or flee mode, right? And that is just in us. That's our amygdala brain just responding, our mammal brain responding. But to accept a compliment, it needs to be processed all the way through, from your emotions to the processing side, the left side of your brain, and all the way out to be a memory. And just imagine with me, and I'm doing it to you. Just imagine with me if we could build up memories of compliments, a memory bank of joy, a memory bank of beauty instead of a memory bank of fleeing or anger or terror. And I can understand, because when we were young, you were going through hard times or you were going through abuse or whatever that memory was. You had to fight or flight, or you had to like
protect yourself.
Yeah, you had to protect yourself. And so you're protecting yourself, so you're pushing them away and you block that out. But now, think about it. You're an adult now, or maybe you're a teenager still, and I'm giving you advice here. What you did in the past is not helping you today. I'm going to say that again. What you did in the past to protect yourself, to secure yourself, is not helping you today. To push people away, to not feel, is not helping you. Imagine if you do that. It's cool if you do that in your 20s, early 20s, and you're like, oh, I'm going to protect myself. But if you do that to people into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you are going to be completely isolated, even though you're surrounded by people. I know that people, even in house church, they seem to isolate themselves because they're insecure in their relationship, because they're still working off this past way of dealing with people, past way of dealing with compliments and criticisms, that we separate ourselves so we can protect ourselves. And no longer is it protecting us. It's hurting you, and it's hurting the people you love most. Because I think about myself, what if I do that to my children and I can't build secure relationships with them anymore because I'm still working with my past way of dealing with people? And how much have we hurt ourselves or messed up our stories because we are holding on to how we did things in the past because of our fears and anxieties? What if God right now is asking us to work in our true selves? And that's going to take vulnerability. That's going to take something that's uncomfortable, and maybe a little bit of 30 seconds of smiling and taking it in. I know that's going to be uncomfortable for me and Hannah. Normally I'm going to throw a joke, or she might, I don't know, you might say something awkward, or, oh, I better grab those vacuums. I do that, right?
Yeah.
I better take care of that kid. I'm sorry if I have done that to you. That is like my natural way of avoidance because of there's systems in my brain that I go to when I feel a certain way, instead of being my true self and saying, I could even say, thank you for saying that compliment. It's very hard for me to take it, but I want to learn how to understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
And we've talked about the false self, and obviously there's other things on that list we might relate to, but you just mentioned at the end there the true self.
Yeah.
And I think it does go back to how we accept the love of God, right? And you talked about that in relation to secure attachment. But unless we can start to, I'm not saying perfectly, but start to accept the perfect love of God for us, we're not going to be able to be open and vulnerable or in community with people in a non-hypocritical way, not presenting a mask to people. So that has to be the place where you start, is what is my true identity? It's not actually the compliments, and it's not actually the criticisms that maybe weigh more heavily in your mind. Your true identity is as a beloved child of God.
Yeah.
God is very glad that you exist, no matter where you're at in this moment. God is very glad you exist. And that kind of has to be the starting point before we can live in our true selves.
Yeah. And just to close off this conversation, maybe this week that might be a good starting point for you and for me, is really getting back to this place of what does God think of me, and finding our identity, our image in the image of God, that He purposely made us, gave us free will, put us in His story, gave us beauty to create, gave us a will, and that He's with us. And maybe we need to go back to salvation, the moment of salvation, and reassess that as a moment of securely attaching to God, that we could trust Him. And if we can trust Him, we can actually move in faith because we know that God is with us. Yeah, I hope that would be a part of your spiritual exercises this week, in your prayer, in your thoughts and meditation. God bless you.